I never thought a single night could change everything. But Rachel's birthday party did exactly that. She'd spent weeks planning this big, glamorous event, the kind where everyone laughed at her jokes, hung on her every word, and whispered about how perfect her life was. Everyone but me. I showed up, hoping for one night, just maybe, I could be part of her world. But instead, the moment I stepped inside, the smiles turned cold. Rachel's eyes caught mine. That smile wasn't warm. It was sharp, like a blade. "What are you doing here?" She sneered loudly, her voice slicing through the music and chatter. Tried to explain, but she wouldn't let me. "Everyone, can you believe she actually came? What's next? Trying to ruin my night?" Laughter bubbled around the room, but it wasn't funny. It was cruel. My face burned. I stood frozen as she pushed me towards the door. "Get out," she hissed. "You don't belong here." I left, the party alone, tears blurring my vision. I'd been kicked out, humiliated in front of the very people I wanted to impress. But the worst part wasn't the party. It was knowing this wasn't new. Rachel had spent years putting me down, twisting stories to make me look like the villain. And my parents? They never saw through it. That night, broken and rejected, I made a promise to myself. This wasn't how my story would end. After that terrible night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong beneath the surface of my family's perfect facade. Rachel's cruelty wasn't just jealousy. It was calculated, and my parents seemed blind to it. Then, everything changed the day Dad passed away unexpectedly. The grief was raw, but what followed shook me even more. The reading of his will. I sat there, heart pounding, surrounded by family who barely hid their eagerness. Rachel was smirking, confident that she'd get everything. My stomach churned, but I held on to a flicker of hope. As the lawyer began to read, my eyes widened. Dad had left a letter, one he'd asked to be opened only after his death. It wasn't just a will. It was his truth. In that letter, Dad admitted he'd been blind to Rachel's manipulations, how she twisted every story to pit them against me. But more importantly, he revealed how proud he was of me, quiet, hardworking, and kind. How he always believed in me, even when others didn't. The letter exposed Rachel's selfishness and greed, naming incidents I'd only whispered about in secret. It was like Dad was finally standing up for me, even from beyond the grave. Rachel's smile faltered. The room shifted. For the first time, the perfect sister's mask began to crack. I felt tears sting my eyes, but this time, they were tears of validation, of justice, of hope. This was only the beginning. I knew I had to fight, not just for the inheritance, but for the truth, my dignity, and the family I deserved. After Dad's will was read, the atmosphere in the house turned cold and heavy. Rachel was no longer the confident queen bee. Instead, her face was pale, and her eyes darted nervously. I realized this was going to be more than just a legal battle. It was a fight for my identity, my truth, and my place in the family. The lawyer explained that because of the letter and inconsistencies in Rachel's claims, there would be a court case. Rachel and I would have to face each other in front of a judge, exposing everything we'd hidden for years. I felt a mix of fear and determination. I was scared to relive the pain and accusations. But more than that, I was ready to stand up for myself. For years, I'd been the invisible sister, the scapegoat. No more. Rachel tried to reach out at first. Her calls and messages were full of false apologies and empty promises. But I ignored them. This time, I had to protect myself. Friends and some family members began to rally behind me. Their belief in my story was a lifeline, a reminder that I wasn't alone. The night before the first hearing, I lay awake, heart pounding. I thought about the party where Rachel had kicked me out, the years of lies and silent suffering. But I also thought about Dad's letter, his faith in me, his hope for my future. I wasn't just fighting for money or possessions. I was fighting for respect, for the chance to be seen as who I truly was. When the court day arrived, I walked into the room with quiet confidence. This was my moment, to finally speak my truth and let the chips fall where they may. The courtroom was cold and sterile, nothing like the warmth I craved from family, but it was the stage where my truth would finally be heard. When Rachel entered, her usual poise was gone. Her eyes flicked nervously toward me, and for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the sister she once was, before the lies and bitterness took over. The judge called the session to order, and the lawyer began presenting evidence. Each document, each testimony peeled back layers of deception Rachel had woven for years. I listened as the lawyer recounted moments I had long buried, how Rachel manipulated my parents, spread false rumors, and tried to discredit me at every turn. It was painful, but necessary. When it was my turn to speak, my voice trembled at first. But as I shared my story, the humiliation at the party, the silent suffering, the desperate hope for family love, it steadied. I wasn't just telling a story of betrayal. I was reclaiming my identity. Rachel's face grew paler with every word. I saw her jaw tighten, her eyes avoid mine. The sister who once kicked me out of her party was now shrinking under the weight of truth. The courtroom was silent except for my voice and the rustle of papers. When I finished, the judge nodded solemnly. This wasn't just about a will anymore. It was about righting years of wrongs. Walking out of that courtroom, I felt lighter, like a heavy burden had been lifted. I knew the fight wasn't over, but I had taken the hardest step, standing up and being heard. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen. After the first day in court, things at home changed drastically. The fragile peace shattered, and family secrets started spilling out like poison. Some relatives who once stayed silent began whispering behind closed doors, questioning Rachel's behavior for the first time. Others chose sides, turning the house into a battlefield of loyalties. My parents, caught in the middle, struggled to reconcile the daughter they thought they knew with the reality the court was exposing. My mother's eyes filled with tears more than once, torn between denial and guilt. Rachel, once so confident and untouchable, grew defensive and erratic. She lashed out at me in small ways, mean comments, cold shoulders, and attempts to isolate me from family gatherings. But this time, I stood firm. The resilience I'd built over years of pain kept me grounded. I refused to be broken by her cruelty. One evening, after a particularly harsh confrontation, I found a letter slipped under my door. It was from Dad. Well, a letter he'd written, years ago, but only meant to be read after his death. Reading his words again reminded me why I was fighting. He saw my worth when no one else did, and his belief was my armor. The court case wasn't just about inheritance anymore. It was about healing wounds, revealing truth, and reclaiming a family torn apart by lies. Rachel's pale face in court was only the beginning of the unraveling. The truth was coming out, piece by painful piece, and with it, my chance at justice and peace. The courtroom battles continued, each session peeling back more layers of family secrets. Rachel's defenses grew weaker as evidence mounted. Emails, messages, testimonies from people who had quietly witnessed her manipulations but never spoke up. I felt exhausted yet strangely empowered. Each day I walked into court, I carried not just my pain, but the hope that finally the truth would set us free. At home, the tension was suffocating. Family dinners became battlegrounds of silence and cold stares. But I found unexpected allies. Relatives who had once been afraid to speak were now quietly supporting me, offering words of encouragement in hushed tones. Through it all, I held on to Dad's letter like a lifeline. His faith in me was the quiet strength that kept me going on days when despair threatened to overwhelm. One night, after a long day in court, I sat by myself, reflecting on everything. The rejection, the betrayal, the long nights crying alone. But also, the small victories, the moments of courage, the friends who stood by me, the judge's respectful nods. I realized that this fight was more than just about a will. It was about reclaiming my voice, my dignity, and my place in a family that tried to erase me. Rachel might have kicked me out of her party, but now, in this courtroom, I was standing tall, unbreakable and true. The days dragged on, each court session feeling heavier than the last. Rachel's facade was cracking more with every piece of evidence, every witness testimony that painted the true picture of her behavior. But it wasn't just about the facts anymore. It was about the raw, emotions bubbling just beneath the surface. I remember one moment vividly. Rachel broke down in court, her voice shaking, tears falling. For a second she looked vulnerable, and I wondered if beneath all the anger, there was regret. But even in her breakdown, she tried to twist the narrative, trying to paint me as the one at fault. That moment was a turning point for me. I realized this fight wasn't just about proving who was right or wrong anymore. It was about healing the wounds that had run deep for years. I spoke calmly, telling my story not just as a list of accusations, but as the truth of my experience. The pain of being overlooked, the loneliness of feeling unwanted, the heartbreak of a sister who should have been my ally. The courtroom was quiet, and even the judge seemed moved. Outside the courtroom, whispers started to change. Relatives who had once been silent began to reach out, offering quiet support. Friends who had doubted me found new respect. I wasn't just fighting for my inheritance anymore. I was fighting for my identity, my family, and my future. Rachel's pale face wasn't just from fear. It was the fear of losing the perfect image she'd spent years crafting. And as the truth settled in, I knew my victory was close. The final days before the court's decision were the hardest. The waiting felt like torture. Every minute stretched into hours of doubt and fear. I replayed every moment in my mind. Rachel's sneers, Dad's letter, the courtroom silence when I told my truth. Then came the day of the verdict. Walking into the courtroom, I felt a strange mix of calm and pounding anxiety. Rachel sat across from me, her face drained of color, eyes flicking nervously. The judge began to speak, his voice steady but heavy with meaning. He acknowledged the pain both sisters had carried for years but made it clear. The evidence was undeniable. Dad's letter was the key, exposing the web of lies Rachel had spun to isolate me and control the family's story. Rachel's face went pale as the judge ruled in my favor, confirming my rightful place in the inheritance and demanding an end to the division she had caused. As the gavel struck, I felt a rush of relief, tears threatening to spill. For the first time, I felt the weight of years lift off my shoulders. But the victory wasn't just legal. It was emotional. I had reclaimed my dignity, my voice, and a sense of belonging. Rachel looked stunned, no words left to defend her. The family was forced to confront the truth, and slowly, walls began to crumble. Walking out of that courtroom, I knew the real healing was just beginning, but this was my moment. I had finally been seen. The court ruling brought a wave of change. With justice finally served, I thought things would instantly get better. But healing takes time. Family gatherings were awkward at first. The silence was thick, filled with unspoken apologies and regret. Rachel avoided me, her pride bruised, and defenses still high. But some family members, those who had watched quietly from the sidelines, started reaching out. They apologized for doubting me, for not speaking up sooner. Their support reminded me I wasn't alone, and that truth had a way of breaking through even the hardest walls. I began to rebuild relationships slowly, with those willing to see me beyond the old stories and lies. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. At the same time, I focused on myself, my dreams, my happiness, and my peace. Dad's words echoed in my mind, reminding me that my worth wasn't tied to anyone's approval, but my own. Rachel and I were still strangers, but the distance between us no longer felt like a battlefield. Maybe someday healing could come. Maybe forgiveness too. For now, I was learning to live with the strength I'd found, quiet, unshakable, and true. Months have passed since the courtroom battle ended, and though the scars remain, I finally feel like I'm stepping into a new chapter of my life. I'm no longer the invisible sister, the one my family dismissed, and the sister who got kicked out of a party. I've found my voice, and more importantly, I've found myself. The support from friends and newfound family allies has been a healing balm, helping me rebuild confidence and trust. I still think about Rachel sometimes. Our relationship may never be what I once dreamed it could be, but I've learned that some wounds take time, and some distances are necessary for peace. What matters most is that I no longer live in the shadow of rejection or silence. Dad's letter wasn't just a piece of paper. It was a reminder that I am worthy, that I am loved, and that I have a place in this world. Standing tall today, I feel a quiet pride in how far I've come. The pain, the betrayal, the long fight, it all shaped me into someone stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace whatever comes next. My story is proof that even when your own family tries to break you down, you can rise, you can reclaim your worth, and you can build the family you deserve, starting with yourself.